Last week, Destiny was on Charlie Houpert's podcast, and he said some things about eating meat that I didn't quite follow. Now, I'm not sure if I didn't follow it because I'm a protein-deficient vegan and I had taken a lot of ketamine, come on, it's Mardi Gras, or if I didn't follow it because it actually didn't make sense. So today we're going to figure out if, one, I'm just too dumb to understand Destiny's logic, or two, his logic doesn't make sense. Let's get into it.
I was also told to ask you about meat eating and your position on meat eating. For the record, I'm pescatarian. I eat fish.
Okay, I love eating meat and torturing animals and all the horrible things that vegans commit me to when I say that.
This is already kind of defensive, like, oh yes, I love eating meat and torturing animals. So he's kind of making it sound like vegans just accuse him of torturing animals out of nowhere. But if we look at what's actually happening, we have thousands of hours of evidence that show the systematic abuse and torture of animals in the meat and dairy industry. So if someone is paying for meat and dairy products, they are paying for that abuse to continue. Therefore, they're paying for animals to be tortured. Therefore, they're torturing animals. Now, I wouldn't say it in the sense of like, oh, you're torturing animals, but I would say that you're paying to torture animals. That's not vegans just saying some weird stuff. That is the reality of the situation.
Interesting. So what? Yeah. So forget this. Forget the vegans. Forget all that. What is your? Have you thought morally about meat eating, and is it informed, or is it just what you like the taste of?
I love how Charlie says, forget vegans, forget vegetarians, all that. Let's just focus on this. I really wish that more people forgot about vegans when they were talking about animal rights, because as much as we vegans love to make everything about ourselves, it's not about us. It's about the animals. I would love to separate animals from veganism. I think the more we do that, the better the animal rights position is, because at the end of the day, it really has nothing to do with vegans and it has everything to do with animals. I also want to say that Charlie Houpert was a huge influence on myself going vegan, even though he's not vegan. I think he has a really compelling way of talking about animal rights. So I'm also going to be breaking down some of that throughout this video.
There is a whole line of argumentation down there, depending on the basically vegans start from a point of we ought to value sentient life. I typically start from the point of we ought to value human sentient life. People will ask me why humans versus all sentient life, and I'll say, well, I think the human conscious experience is something unique that we ought to protect, but it's kind of arbitrary because it's very foundational. And they'll say, well, I think we should protect all life, and I'll say, well, why? And they'll go, well, because suffering is bad. And it's like, why is it, but the suffering of what things is bad? It's like, well, why? And you start to ground out in these areas that are like fundamentally unknowable or outside of like human knowledge. So that's why I'm a meter. The ethical arguments get like very, very into the weeds on like epistemics and ethics in terms of like how do we figure out exactly, where our foundational belief is here for all of our ethical beliefs. But where I'm at is I'm a meat eater.
I find that a weird way to answer this question. Basically, he's not just answering meat eating directly. He's talking about like a debate he's had in the past where people come from valuing sentience, and he says we should only value human sentience. Now, when I talk about veganism, I typically don't start from that position, although I think that's a valid position to take. I start from the position of we know for sure, it's not unknowable, we know this for a fact, that animals suffer and feel pain and feel emotions. We also know for a fact that humans don't need to eat animals or animal products to survive and thrive. And third, we know that animal agriculture is causing massive problems for the entire world, not just animals. There's climate change, pandemics, antibiotic resistance, ocean dead zones, deforestation, all this shit that can be attributed to animal agriculture. So I think if Destiny is starting from the position of, oh, we should value human sentience, even that is in line with veganism because of the massive amount of human suffering that is caused by animal agriculture. And we don't have to get into unknowable realms for this. We just need to look at what's currently happening in the world.
But I'm a consistent meat eater, okay? I think that most people on this planet, based on where their ethical intuitions lie, should probably be vegetarians, I think. Usually what I get the most fun out of is anytime like an animal gets like tortured or killed, like Cecil the lion or that the gorilla that got shot.
Harambe,
kid. Yeah. Whenever shit like this happens, I will relentlessly make fun of meat eaters that get super emotionally invested and involved and get like cry or whatever when like between like snarfing down, mouthfuls of chicken nuggets and cheeseburgers of animals that are being factory farmed and stuff. I think it's incredibly hypocritical. If you care about stuff like your dog or your cat and all this, probably you shouldn't be like a meat eater. If it like morally bothers you if people eat like cats or dogs, but you think it's okay to eat cows or pigs or whatever. But yeah, that's a whole other.
I'm curious why he says vegetarian and not vegan. I would guess it's because he doesn't know how awful the dairy and egg industries are. If he knew much about that, he would know that all those animals are tortured and killed as well. So morally, there's really no difference between meat and dairy. I would honestly say that dairy and egg industries are worse. So that just shows to me that he has a lack of knowledge in this area. Destiny, you're someone who likes research. I encourage you to research these industries more. At the end of the day, the animals don't care whether a meat eater is a hypocrite about it or not. They care if they're getting tortured for these products. So it doesn't matter morally if you're a consistent meat eater or an inconsistent meat eater. What matters is that you should stop paying for animals to be tortured and go vegan.
You mentioned that your ground is human sentience. Is that a reasoned position, or is that just an intuitive moral position where you don't feel a connection to animals?
I think at some point we're gonna have to say that it's intuitive, but I mean, like the rationale, I guess, is that like I feel like human conscious experiences, there's a lot of parts of these that are incredibly unique that only exist insofar as like human experiences go. So like comprehension of language, not just like speaking a word and having a reaction, but like the entire there's an entire cognition that goes into understanding language that like only humans understand.
I think you can accept the premise that humans are the only ones who can understand language at a certain level, and also accept the fact that that's not reason enough to justify torturing animals, because at the end of the day, we're looking for like a difference between humans and animals that really justifies the difference in treatment, and that's where I feel like Destiny's not providing a good answer. You don't have to value humans and animals as the same to be vegan, but you really do need a solid foundation to justify all the horrible things that we do to animals. And this understanding language, I feel like what he's trying to avoid is he doesn't want to just say, oh, I value humans because of species, so he's trying to find something else. The reason he doesn't want to do that is because he knows that would just be an appeal to group, which is obviously a logical fallacy. So he's trying to find something else that would allow for this sort of logic. And the comprehension of language thing is really confusing to me, but I think he's going to continue talking about that, so maybe he'll explain it a little better.
So for instance, like animals can't understand negatives, for instance. Like if I tell you your mom is not in that room, that has like semantic meaning to you. You understand that. But an animal can't understand a negative, or they can't understand like being able to describe something else in another time or place. They have like more like complicated systems of like Pavlovian responses, essentially, right? Like if I bark, I could tell you there's like danger or food, but I couldn't communicate like complicated information that exists in different time or space and things. Like there's a lot of like parts of our mind, of our conscious sentient experiences that are incredibly elevated compared to animals. So I'll say that like that's probably the reason why I value the human conscious experience a bit differently. There's a very common line of vegan argumentation called name the trait, where they'll try to get you to say like, well, what is the one trait a human has that every human has that animals don't have? Yeah. Basically stuff like that. And it gets pretty difficult to go through the weeds, but that's essentially kind of where I wind up.
So that didn't help me understand it any better at all. He's saying that since animals don't understand negative language, that we can anally electrocute them, we can put them into blenders, we can put them into gas chambers because they don't understand that your mom is not in the room when you say that. I find that logic to be absolutely insane. I'm imagining if Destiny were on a desert island and there were 3 people and he had to eat one of them, if he would ask them, like, how many languages can you understand? Can you explain this language better than the next person? And that's how he would make his decision on who has more value or not. That is absolutely insane. And I say this, I actually respect Destiny. I think he's a great dude, but this makes absolutely no sense to me, and I don't think it's because I'm dumb. I think it's because it actually just doesn't make sense.
Got it. And I mean, because that was where I was going to ask, was just like someone who, you know, it has a language deficiency or is mentally retarded, which I don't know what we call that nowadays. Like
that word
is not that, is maybe that's why people are upset when you use it, because you would eat them.
Maybe, sure.
So that's actually hilarious. There was at the beginning of the podcast, they were talking about how people get mad at Destiny when he says the word retarded, and now Charlie's calling that back and saying they probably get mad because you would eat them. And I'll see if Destiny refutes that, if he would not eat a retarded person. But yeah, that's name the trait. And he mentioned earlier that going into refuting name the trait is like getting into the weeds, but it's really not. It's just a consistency test, and there really should be a strong reason, because extraordinary violence, I think, should require extraordinary justification. And if you're okay with doing all this horrific shit to animals, you should have a very strong reason for it. And if you can't even name the trait, it's not because you're going into the weeds or like this thing is like unknowable. It's because you're not providing a good enough justification. It almost feels like he's blaming the vegans and name the trait instead of blaming his inability to answer it logically.
How do you answer that, name that trait? Objection?
I never go by traits. I say that like humans are gifted a priori with like the faculty for a type of cognition that doesn't exist even in like apes or gorillas. Like can't like comprehend language, for instance. Some people are going to fight with like Coco the ape or whatever, or the gorilla. Like none of that actually is true. If you go
and let me ask you, like what is it? The contrapositive. Like, what if an ape could? What if we found an ape that like spoke? With that,
yeah, I think at some point, I think you'd have to make a concession. Like if an alien species came and they seem to possess like similar faculty, you'd have to say like, okay, well, if we're gonna grant humans the right to exist or whatever, we probably should for these creatures as well, right?
I find it interesting that when Charlie asks what he does for name the trait, Destiny basically says he avoids it and talks about a priori things that humans have that animals don't have or something. So like he doesn't come up with a specific trait. It goes back to this understanding of language thing, and then Charlie asks what if there was an ape who could, and Destiny brings in the example of aliens, which I actually found really interesting because typically when I hear people use the alien example, it's that an alien species comes and they want to do the things that we humans do to animals. What do we say to them? So I find it very interesting that Destiny still took the position of humans, like we would have to grant these aliens, we would have to grant them rights. But I would be curious to ask Destiny, what would he say to these aliens if they came to Earth and they wanted to torture us? And their justification was that we didn't have as good of an understanding of language as they do. What would he say to that? Does he think that would be a good enough reason for them to torture us?
I mean, I disagree with a lot of that, but it sounds like you've had these arguments before, and so we don't need to.
The next question is, how do I feel about abortion?
No.
Those are the two biggest arguments where people come out of my whole audience like, no.
Maybe they come out of your audience that way because they don't find your answer satisfactory. I don't know what you've said about abortion, but I think that probably a lot of vegan members of your audience are disappointed in your answer because it's just not a good enough reason to justify what's happening to animals.
No, my sense of you, which you obviously don't agree with, is that you are starting from wanting to eat meat and rationalizing backward for like what are the differences that will grant this, that will also make me, which also seems very important to you, to remain intellectually consistent. And I imagine, I could be wrong, that your experience does probably include a lot of intuitive felt connection to animals, because I think that probably like me, you're connected to what appears to be a spectrum of consciousness that you experience them as having, and like their capacity to suffer moves you. I would guess, though I don't know exactly what goes on in your experience of
Sure, yeah, probably. For most people, right? Like I would say like a person that tortures animals is probably a bad person because there's something missing empathetically there that would make them more likely to hurt humans.
I hate when people say stuff like that. Like they say that torturing animals is bad because then the human's more likely to harm humans. Can't we just say that torturing animals is bad because an animal getting tortured is bad? I mean, if I saw someone torturing a dog, I wouldn't think like, oh no, they're gonna go home and harm someone. I'd feel really sorry for the dog.
Would you, well, then we can wrap on this. Would you feel compassion for the animal? Like, let's assume that person never harms a human ever. Like they just get off on horses, cows, pigs, dogs, cats.
I mean, I think you would, but I mean, like, would I? I think I probably would. Yeah, because there's intuitive. It's not an intuition pump. There are things that are gonna ring true for everybody. Like hearing something cry out. It sounds like a baby. It sounds like a cry. Something trying to escape from a negative stimulus. Like these are all going to be things that's like you feel that, right? Even like a robot doing these things, you'd probably have like an empathetic response for it, right? Yeah.
There are some vegans who don't even like animals at all, but even they can see that what we're doing to animals is not okay. So Destiny, I have a couple more things that I would want to ask you. First of all, I don't think it matters if animals can understand language at the same capacity that we can. That doesn't seem like enough of a difference to justify harming them when we don't need to. And I would say that the animals are trying to talk to you and you're not listening. You know, the pigs are screaming when they're killed in gas chambers. The dairy cows are crying when their babies are taken away from them. Like, what would it take to get you to look more into the animal agriculture industry? If you're someone who values research and values ethical consistency, I just want want to understand where this disconnect is, and it probably comes down to the fact that you just don't want to go vegan, like you think it might be too hard or that the food's not good enough. I promise you the food is amazing and it's super easy. I'm incredibly lazy, even I can do it. So I promise you that going vegan is easier than these weird mental gymnastics that you're doing to try to justify torturing animals when I think that you should know that it's morally wrong. Thanks for watching today. Let me know in the comments what you think of Destiny's arguments, if you think I am just too dumb to understand it, or if you think his arguments are crap. And special thanks to my morally superior patrons, Amy, Andy, Deepak, and Rebecca.